Welcome to Amintro Family, the podcast. I'm your host, Jeff Sammut. We hope you're enjoying the free online platform and community for family caregivers, be it through the Amintro Family app or amintrofamily.com. It's all about helping those caring for their aging parents and relatives or friends, and to connect and share experiences and to access valuable resources. We hope Jay Loveless is getting all that through just joining the app. Jay, thank you, and welcome to the community here. Our guest is the CEO of the Ontario Caregiver Organization, Amy Coupal. And Amy, time and time again, I've asked you to join me on whatever show or platform I'm on, and you always say yes. This time on this show, I got to say, means the most to me. So I appreciate this. Thank you.
Oh, I'm really happy to be speaking with you today, for sure.
Thank you, Amy. And, we've always had informative conversations about the state of care these days and about what gaps the Ontario Caregiver Organization is filling. And we're going to do that again, Amy. But this time, I want to hear more about your specific caregiving journey. Now you're a wonderful blend of insight and the ability to share it. And you have a Master of Education from the University of Calgary. You're an Adler-trained coach. Perhaps the education that had the most impact on you happened at home, having spent so much of your life in a caregiving role. Take us back, all the way back to helping to support your brother.
Well, I think you summarized my experience in terms of its importance really well, because I feel that being a caregiver shaped so many aspects of my life. So my brother had quadriplegic cerebral palsy, and I'm 2 years younger than him. So I was really born into his world, and I learned to take on different caregiving responsibilities as I grew up. And that was really just such a normal part of my childhood and our family. And so that meant different things at different ages and stages of life. But by the time I was a teenager, if my brother was in the hospital, I was doing my shift, so to speak, at the hospital. He wasn't able to speak for himself, so there was always a family member with him if he needed an advocate there, and also somebody to support him in lots of different ways, as caregivers do. And so, at home, in the hospital, with appointments, all of those things, that was such a normal part of my life growing up and being a young caregiver for him, that I can certainly relate to young caregivers, but all caregivers, because it's in my DNA.
Yeah, it seems to be. Like, I was going to say or ask, have you ever not been a caregiver?
Well, my brother passed away when I was 20 and he was 22. And so that was the end of my young caregiving journey. And I did have a gap, actually, where I wasn't really actively caregiving. And then maybe about 15 odd years after that, my mom was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. And the whole family really rallied again around the caregiving aspect of things with my mom. And we kind of knew what to do because we were caregivers, but it was also a realization that caregiving really looks so different for different people, different family relationships, different needs. So my caregiving experience with my brother was so different than with my mom. I was an adult, she's my mom, and so that was a very different caregiving relationship and way of doing things as a part of the circle of care with my dad, my sister. My aunt was also very actively involved. And then my mom passed away about 2.5 years after her diagnosis. So then I had another gap in my life. And then my dad, who is now 88, his needs have evolved very slowly over time. And I'm seeing how being a caregiver for someone in older adulthood is different yet again. Right? And that my commitments and my responsibilities as a caregiver are totally different than they were with my mom or my brother. So I say to caregivers all the time, I'll never make an assumption about what your experience is like, because just from the 3 distinct caregiving experiences that I have had, they have not been the same at all.
Oh, so that's very interesting. So it's time and time again you've come back to the role, and the role has changed every time you've come back to it. So being born into the role, because obviously there's the responsibilities of being a caregiver, but you're also a family member, and there's the emotional toll that comes with taking care of and then eventually saying goodbye to people that you are caring for. And I'm sorry for your losses, Amy. Did you ever have a moment or some time where you felt sorry for yourself? Because there might be a lot of people that are listening right now that hadn't been a caregiver for many years, and then all of a sudden you become a caregiver, and it's all consuming, and then you have some time where you might have a bit of a pity party, and you might feel sorry for yourself, and I get that. I've been there. But you were born into that role. Was there ever any times where you felt sorry for yourself and you said, well, why do I have to do this? And but more than that, why is this happening to my brother? Why is this, later on happening to my mother? Did you ever feel sorry for yourself and feel sorry for the situation that your family was in?
Well, here's what I can say. Caregiving is all the things, right? I have experienced every single emotion related to caregiving, right? And that's things like hope and optimism and gratitude, but it can also be things like anger and resentment and frustration. And so I have truly felt all of those things around each of my caregiving responsibilities. Did I feel sorry for myself? I think there have been moments where it's been really tough to make the choices that are required in the moment, right? And so as a young person, I distinctly remember one day getting picked up at the bus station in Toronto by my mom, and she said, your brother's in the hospital and I'm dropping you off there. I mean, it was literally a 5-minute drive. I'm dropping you off there because it's your turn. And I had this moment of, oh, I don't get to go home or do laundry or, kind of make the transition. I'm right back into it. I don't think in that moment I felt sorry for myself, but I definitely felt like, ooh, this trajectory that I thought I was on for my day is interrupted, right? For me, because caregiving has been so much a part of our family, I really don't know it any other way, but I've certainly had all the feelings that pretty much every caregiver has had. And it is not easy, right? And sometimes the choices and the conflicts in the way that we spend our time or what's happening can be really tough. And I have certainly felt that way.
I think it's very important that caregivers heard what you just said
Yeah.
about feeling all of those things, because then it gives you permission as a caregiver to feel those things, to say it's right. This is okay. This is what other caregivers go through. I think it's really important to give yourself permission to say, I'm just going to feel bad about myself, at least at the moment. Maybe this will pass in 5 minutes or an hour or a day, but this is the way I'm feeling right now, and that's all right.
I totally agree with you. And I think it's really important to normalize that if this is, I don't know what could be more a part of the human experience than caregiving, right? This is how we relate to each other. This is how we look after each other. But it also means that it includes all of these different ways that we can experience life. And I will also say that as a caregiver, I have had some of my least fine moments of experiencing myself, where I've looked at myself and gone, oh, Amy, that was just not your best, right? I've lost my cool. I've maybe not made the best choice in terms of the circumstance or myself. And you kind of have to give yourself a lot of grace in those situations and just say, you know what, I wasn't at my best, or I didn't do my best, or whatever the situation is, but I am going to keep going for me and for the person that I care for. And that is not always easy.
It's not. I can recall, as you were speaking, I recalled a couple of moments in my caregiving life where I went, geez, I wish I reacted better.
Yeah.
That's a memory I have that stuck with me. And, maybe to those I was caregiving for, they didn't think anything of it, or they weren't present for it necessarily. But that takes work. And I think I'm evidence of it, that it takes years to work on that, and I'll continue doing that, Amy. In a previous episode, I was speaking with documentary filmmaker Chris Durrance about his film Caregiving. And in it, he highlighted a 14-year-old caregiver described by his mom as a 40-year-old trapped in a 14-year-old body. Would you, in looking back, describe yourself the same way?
I've seen that film. It is such a beautiful film, and
It is, isn't it?
I remember that moment. That relationship
Yeah.
between mother and son was so beautiful. I do think, for me personally, it required caregiving required things of me at a much younger age than it does for young people who don't have that experience. So do I think that it called on a different level of maturity or a different level of capacity much earlier? Honestly, yes. And when I talk with young caregivers who are doing incredible things right now for parents, grandparents, siblings, lots of different people in their lives, they are, sometimes doing medical tasks at home, managing medication, administering different procedures. Young caregivers can be, in certain circumstances, doing a lot. And they do have to act much older than their age in many cases. And they often have to make different choices, right? About education, about employment. And so there is a real demand for young caregivers in terms of what life is asking of you. And it's a lot. That's why young caregivers really need support.
Yeah, you never know what they're going through, and you often might not know if you're their teacher or a friend that they are going through what they're going through at home, and it's very important to know all those details and to be present and to be able to support a young caregiver like that. Speaking of supporting, when your mother had her diagnosis, your dad's around. Would you have been the primary caregiver, or was your dad the primary caregiver and you were supporting him as well?
I would say my dad was the primary caregiver, and then there were a number of us in the circle of care: me, my sister, my aunt, a close group of friends as well. And
Yeah.
so there were a lot of people who stepped up, but my dad was the most active person, going back and forth to chemo, doing all sorts of things at home. So he was the primary, and then we were a part of that circle of care.
Have you witnessed this? Because I know somebody that is a caregiver with her siblings, and her father's it's for her mother, and her father isn't necessarily as present as everybody would like. Now, I'm not saying that with judgment. People are going to react in different ways to whatever's going on with a loved one. But what advice would you have for a caregiver that feels that another family member who should be carrying as much, if not more, of the load is just not doing that? What advice would you have for that person that feels that way?
So, a couple of thoughts. First of all, family dynamics and the different division of responsibilities and commitments varies as widely as the number of families who are doing caregiving. So every circumstance really does look different. And if there are issues related to communication or division of responsibilities in the family, they are probably going to show up in the caregiving context, right? And so I think to folks who may be experiencing that, the most important thing is to be clear. Clear on, I'm doing this, you're doing that, so and so is doing that. And, I'll give an example in my family. So I'm the local caregiver to my dad, and my sister lives in another province. So our general division of responsibilities is, if it requires face to face, it's me. And if it's something that can be done virtually, it's her. So if we go to an appointment and there's follow up or a pharmacy call or whatever it is, I'll send her a message and say, here's the action items, have at it, right? And so
Mhm.
we know generally that that's the way it's going to go. And being clear about that means, there shouldn't be any conversation. Why are you asking me to do that? Because we know ahead of time. And so whether it's two people or a group of people, understanding, somebody their job might be walking the dog and watering the plants, right? That's still an important thing that has to happen in that circumstance, if those are things that are required. And so to understand that these things are not always created equal, people do what they can. They may be balancing their own health needs, they may be balancing work or, other family, community commitments. And so it's important to say, what can you do? Okay, great. This is for you. this is for me. And then how can we bring in other kinds of support, either through community, through other family and friends, what's available. But I also want to acknowledge for some people, it's not. Right? Some people
Yeah.
really feel like they are the lone wolf out there doing this all by themselves.
That's right, and that's why we're here, why Ontario Caregiver Organization is around. It's to support people that are part of a team, but that are also feeling like they're all alone. Because as it turns out, if you do a little digging, you'll find that there are others that are present that can help in some way, shape, or form. In looking back at care for your mother, for your brother, do you feel that outside of what you and your family were able to do, that they were supported, through healthcare and the system that had been implemented was part of caregiving? How much of your part of caregiving was advocating for the kind of care that they should be getting? Did you have to work hard at that?
Well, in each of those circumstances, I played a different role. So, as a young person, I think the advocacy that I did for my brother was often around being his voice in specific healthcare situations, right? So, let's use examples of when he was hospitalized. There'd be shift changes, different people coming in. They may not have known him in terms of his safety needs around eating, drinking, those kinds of things. So, that was a moment to moment, hospital shift to hospital shift advocacy that was absolutely required. And I think that that's one of the ways that we as caregivers, always having somebody there, we were advocating. Now, I know that my parents did a different form of advocacy for him than I would have as a young caregiver, and that was definitely required in terms of his medical history, his needs, and lots of other things. With my mom, for most of the time, she was able to advocate for herself, right, through her own healthcare journey, but she definitely needed to do that in terms of determining the right course of action for her and getting access to the care that she needed. As she moved more into that palliative process, it was our job as caregivers to really make sure that her wishes were fulfilled. And this is where I think advocacy comes in. To the extent that you're able, with the person that you're caring for, knowing what they want in each phase of their experience and allowing for that to change if it does is really important. And I talk with caregivers all the time about this in terms of, this might not be what I would choose for me, but I know this is what the person I care for wants, and my job is to support the implementation of that. That's really what I'm doing with my dad right now as his caregiver. I say to him all the time, Dad, my job is to make sure that your wishes are fulfilled around the life you want to live, the care you want to receive, etc. And I will just say, I am my dad's primary advocate right now, and I do a lot. And it's about getting those appointments, following up with specialists, making sure that he's getting the medication, the care that he needs. That job of advocacy for a caregiver is one of the biggest things that people will do regardless of their caregiving circumstances.
Well, he's very lucky to have you, obviously, because you're an amazing daughter. You're a very experienced caregiver. But beyond that, you're you, and we listed your resume of sorts earlier on. You have a knowledge of how the system works. I remember caregiving for my dad. I don't have any knowledge. I'm not a knowledgeable person, but I married somebody that is knowledgeable of the system. And very often in advocating for our dad and my dad and making decisions and helping my mother make the decisions that she would end up making, it would, in many circumstances, be because we were able to read the tea leaves, or if we didn't have the answer, we, meaning my wife, but she would know somebody that knew the answer or did some digging. We knew what avenues to go down and whose doors to knock on and who to call. We were able to be proactive instead of being reactive. And very often we would get through whatever hurdle with my mother in caregiving for my dad. And my wife and I would look at each other and we would say, how would anybody with no knowledge of what we happen to know about would have been able to do this in the time or the effort that we would have been able to do it, as extensive as it would have been? Have you found that where in caregiving and decision making and, oh, this is going to happen, we better get on top of that? Would you have said the same thing throughout all those decisions?
I think this is such an important thing to talk about, and we can look at it from so many different perspectives. One is privilege, right? What are the forms of privilege that you have that are actually helping you as a caregiver? So for you and for me, one of them is that we speak English. Not every
Right.
caregiver may be engaging with healthcare providers in a language that they're comfortable speaking, and they may or may not have access to things like translators, right? So, we can look at privilege through so many different dimensions, but if we just talk about language alone, that is a challenge for caregivers, right? But we can also look at things like, are they working, right? I think about the amount of time that I have to balance in my day as a caregiver, and that I have the capacity to do that because of the kind of job that I have, actually, that other people don't have. If you have a job where you actually have to physically show up at the workplace at a specific time, or you are not getting paid, you are probably disadvantaged as a caregiver, right? So there's lots of different ways to look at that, but I do think your point about, do I have experience? Do I know how to navigate the system? Do I know how to get ahead of some of the things that I think might be coming around the corner? And then can I also adapt when the things I didn't see coming come around the corner? Because maybe I'm a good communicator, maybe I know how to ask the questions, maybe I'm a good project manager. I always say one of the key skills of a caregiver is to be a good project manager. My sister and I
Hire
have
that person.
spreadsheets
And
and lists and,
if a company is looking at a caregiver as a possible hire, do it. They know what they're doing.
right. It is so true. So yeah, I honestly think some people have more resources and privilege than others, and that is one of the core pieces that we are working on as an organization, is to make sure that all caregivers have the support that they need. All caregivers have tools in their toolkit to be able to navigate these things, and that if they don't know what to do or where to go, they can reach out to us, and we can be that support that helps them to feel not so alone. Whether it's one of our team members, a peer mentor, whatever the case may be, you should not have to do this alone. It's tough enough already.
It really is. The Ontario Caregiver Organization, a charitable organization that supports Ontario's 4 million caregivers. At least that's the last time I checked. Maybe that number has changed in going upwards. So how did your time with OCO begin?
Well, this is just one of those synchronous things in life. There was a report that had been written for the government, and it was asking this question about caregivers and who they are, what's going on in the province, and how could they be supported. And one of the recommendations that came out of that report, written by Janet Bede, who became OCO's first board chair, was, we need an organization like they have in other provinces. So BC, Alberta, and Nova Scotia and Quebec all had caregiver orgs prior to Ontario. We have some other provinces that have joined the party, like New Brunswick now, which is great. But when that organization was starting up, they were looking for someone with that charitable and not-for-profit experience, but also caregiving experience. So, I don't know how these things come together in life, but it did feel like this job was made for me because I've worked in charities and not-for-profits for many years, and I have this caregiving experience, and I know enough about caregiving to know there's a lot I don't know. Right? I don't know what your experience is, and I don't know the unique challenges that individuals face, but I do understand that it is an incredibly lonely journey for many people, and that support and connection makes a difference. And so I was given the great privilege of creating these programs and services for caregivers, with caregivers, but also really working with our system partners to improve the experience of caregivers when they're engaging with health and social care. Because usually the reason they're calling us is because it's just so tiring sometimes to work through these processes and overcome these barriers. And so we also want to make that easier for people over time.
Yeah, and I think you have, because I think OCO's programs and services have been successful because caregivers have direct access to them. How much of that success is owed to helping to destigmatize caregiving and amplifying caregivers' voices so that decision makers at various levels can hear them?
I think that's such a good question. You know, one of our main areas of focus from the outset is helping caregivers to self identify. Many people say, I do this because I'm a daughter, I'm a son, I'm a spouse, I'm a parent, whatever the case may be. And they often don't say, I'm a caregiver. So the first thing is to have people know that what they are doing in this kind of context is caregiving. And then to work with those caregivers, and there are so many who want to share their experience with a real goal of influencing change. And so then we want to talk with, you know, healthcare providers, system leaders, all of these different folks about the caregiving experience. And we've got to bring the caregiver voice to that. And so we hope that that does two things. One, that people understand, oh, this is what it really looks like in somebody's lived experience. But we also often find that people then realize, oh, I'm a caregiver too, or oh, I've been a caregiver. And when you can relate to that in terms of your own personal experience, then it can often be a motivator for change. Because if people have been a caregiver themselves, they understand how hard it is, and then we can really work together on creative solutions.
So, how has it been over the years, given your personal and professional experience, to speak directly with a caregiver today? How is that for you?
Incredibly humbling.
Mm.
I am so struck every single time I have the opportunity to talk with a caregiver, work with a caregiver around presenting to decision makers, how they are willing to share their experience, which they don't have to. There's often a lot of emotional labor that comes into that where you really have to kind of
Yeah.
psych yourself up and be ready. And these are people who have wisdom and experience that they want to share, and often that they want to give back to other caregivers. So I love talking with caregivers, and they come at unexpected moments. You know, I'll be handing in a badge at the end of a conference, and somebody will see my badge and say, your organization saved my life. I've had that conversation before. And
Wow.
so those kinds of conversations really keep the gas in my tank, right? To keep going because, you know, people can often end up in our orbit when they feel like they've reached the end of their tether. And if we can help with a plan, with information, with support that allows them to keep going in their life or even recover from a really challenging caregiving circumstance, I cannot tell you how fulfilling that is, truly.
Oh, that's got to be the biggest compliment one can get. I don't think many people can say professionally that they get that kind of immediate gratitude given to them, but well earned, Amy. Like well earned for what you and everybody at OCO does and the services you provide. I think that's well deserved.
Well, you know, we have an incredible team, and most of the team have caregiving experience. They're either caregivers now or they have been caregivers, so they're super motivated. But we also have the most amazing group of volunteers. And these are people who say, I can do this. You know, I can do one focus group. That's how I can give back. Or I want to be a peer mentor and build a relationship with somebody over time. I am so struck by people's willingness to give. And so, you know, we really mutually support each other, mutually reinforce. And then it's about coming up with the creative solutions that are going to make a difference, right? I think everybody is very motivated around, okay, what are the goals that we can work towards where even if that, you know, that caregiver or group of caregivers doesn't know it comes from us, it's going to make a difference in their lives. And that's really what we're trying to accomplish.
It's got to be so gratifying as well to see OCO grow over the years as you have, because it's the organization grows, but that means there are more people that are helping even more people. Like the network just keeps growing and growing.
It does. And, you know, you referenced the number of caregivers. We are now at 4.2 million in Ontario. We
And
expect that
counting.
we'll be at 6.5 million by 2030, which is basically, you
Wow.
know, around the corner. And so we're going to need to have a lot more conversations about caregiving. And I also want to acknowledge There are a lot of organizations working on this, right? We are working in collaboration with organizations that existed long before we did, organizations at the national, provincial, local level, all across, the spectrum of things. And this is really a collective effort. And where I get excited is to see communities getting motivated, conversations happening where we're starting to take this out of this quiet place that nobody talks about into, wow, this is really a part of life for most people. And if we bring it out of that kind of private, nobody talks about it place, then we can actually have conversations about, oh, this is a whole other layer of your life, and what kind of support do you need to make that work with the balance of everything else that's going on for you?
Well, we're talking about it, and Amy, you and I have had many conversations over the years about caregiving, and I'm very grateful for that. Visit OntarioCaregiver.ca, CEO of the Ontario Caregiver Organization, Amy Coupal. Amy, it's always a pleasure. I really appreciate it. Congratulations on the work you're doing. Our best to your dad as well. Thank you so much, Amy.
Thank you so much for having me, and let's keep talking about caregiving.
For sure, will do. There's Amy Coupal. I'm Jeff Sammut. This has been another episode of Amintro Family, the podcast, which you can hear on the Amintro Family app and wherever you listen to podcasts. We've got a new episode dropping every 2 weeks. Check out AmintroFamily.com. And a reminder, we want to hear your stories on the forum, and we can share them here as well on Amintro Family, the podcast.